Great. Welcome, everybody, to House General and Housing. Today is Thursday, April 3rd, all day. And this morning, we're going to hear S-127. We're going to have an introduction and walkthrough. It was just referred to us yesterday. And this, just for context, is the Senate analog committee to ours. It's their wonderful work product bringing to us their version of their housing bill, it's what's really interesting, as you will hear, is that their bill is quite compatible with ours in that it's not a situation where there's very different approaches to the same thing. It's that their bill has really interesting additions that ours does not, and ours has some additions there it does. To be clear, one of the major pieces of their bill, good morning, Mary. One of the major pieces of their bill is, as worked out amongst us, is a real serious look at a tax increment financing district. Substantial part of their bill. What's happening is, although the bill was referred to us, House Commerce is hearing and working on the TIF as we speak. They will be doing that. This morning, after esteemed Senator Keisha Ram kicks this off, we will walk through it with our attorneys. When we get to the tax increment financing part, we're going to hear about that because we should become familiar with it and we will have more to do with it. But someone from Senate Commerce will be coming over here and sitting with us. So our first witness, if you will, is Senator Keisha Ram. Welcome to the committee. And before you introduce yourself, we should introduce ourselves.
Morning, Senator Ashley Barley, Fairfax, Georgia.
Joe Parsons, Newberry, Thompson, and Groton.
Okay, I'm gonna try to commit this to memory.
You don't know Joe, huh?
I mean, maybe, but I don't think we've had a conversation. So that with so many new faces now, I'm trying to figure out who was here. And
Yeah.
it's been a while. And I also had 2 kids last biennium, so I wasn't floating around the building very much.
Right.
Well, this face is Tom Carlton. I represent Athens, Chester, Grafton.
See, I always thought it was Athens.
Not there.
Okay, Oh, is this a-
Athens? Yeah.
okay. Good to know.
I'm Debbie Dolkin. I represent St. Johnsbury, Concord, and Kirby.
Good morning. I'm Gail Peso, Chittenden 20, Colchester.
I'm Mary
I
Happy.
know Mary. Everyone.
I represent
knows and loves Mary.
Rutland City District 6.
No stranger as well as my senator, Emily Krasnow, Chittenden 9 South Burlington, and I'm sorry, I'll have to swap places and go downstairs with you and testify in a few minutes.
Yes, that's right. I heard that. So thank you. Maybe we'll be going down together unless I might stay for Cameron's
We'll swap around.
part of his walkthrough if it's helpful. But for the record, Senator Keisha Ram Hinsdale, former chair of Senate Economic Development, Housing and General Affairs, and current majority leader. And my chair likes to call me the housing queen because I cannot see a problem in Vermont that doesn't have a lack of housing at its root. And that in a broader sense is our demographic challenge. But we will not get anywhere in trying to solve our demographic challenges in any other way than developing more housing in the state. Oh, good morning, Natra.
Good one.
It is for me very refreshing that your chair, and it sounds like in terms of the direction of your committee, is working in great tandem with us on addressing the housing emergency. I could keep waxing poetic about the importance of housing, but I may, for those who are somewhat new, just walk through our work of the last 2 years and why you see some of these things before you and what is frankly yet to come. Because for me, funding and financing mechanisms are one leg of the table. And we spent the last 2 years looking, well, and I would say we spent the biennium before that spending a lot of money that the federal government gave us. And I'm proud that we made historic investments in housing and affordable housing. But it then became even more apparent that you simply cannot throw money at the problem. That it is expensive to build housing in Vermont. We're up around $600,000 a unit, at least in Chittenden County. And it is not timely. It is very easy to delay a housing project, which does add cost, and it can kill a project. So after we invested lots of money that went into great projects, but we saw housing projects go to the Supreme Court twice, sometimes, like in Putney, at the expense of millions of dollars. We turned our attention to long needed, much awaited, much debated permit reform. And first we looked at single family zoning and municipal permitting, and we ended single family zoning 3 years ago effectively. You now can build an ADU or a duplex by right anywhere in the state, and along water and sewer lines, or where there's water and sewer capacity, you can build a quadplex by right. We did not stop there, because the other main impediment that we've heard a lot about over
This
the
is
years.
in the Home Act, right?
That's the Home Act, exactly. Then Act 181, I call things like the Home Act because I'm really bad at the numbers. Then Act 181 was our follow-on bill the next year, looking at Act 250 and looking at 50 years of state land use policy that needed reform, frankly. And particularly, I think the main principle there was, if you have determined that the land use is commercial, economic, housing, human activity, then there's no longer the need to have Act 250 oversight when it's no longer a land use question. And so we created temporary exemptions to Act 250 in densely settled areas and our downtowns and village centers. And I just spoke with the Land Use Review Board at one of their recent meetings. We are looking forward to their work to make permanent maps with lots of input. And I would say we hoped to ensure that we did not preserve our rural communities in amber. One might say that they deserve to have the same mix of housing and economic opportunity and vitality. And we want to continue to make sure that we have housing and growth everywhere, particularly, I would say, because clustered affordable housing helps keep people in their communities. We did not want to see seniors have to move all the way to Burlington from the Kingdom just to get, senior affordable housing. And so we are trying to make it more affordable and more accessible to have local, multifamily, clustered, affordable housing of some kind for everyone in the state. That brings us to this bill as part of a series of bills, and this year, looking at some cleanup from what we've done in the past, and in this bill, taking significant aim at our infrastructure problem. So, if you just lined up all of the barriers to developing housing and overall economic development, infrastructure is another one of our major barriers in the state. We hope now that some of our permit work and some permit work that is in other bills that I'm working on, like S-133, that's in the Natural Resources Committee, will help us ensure that people cannot fight infrastructure for housing while we are trying to fund it. That has been our goal all along, is if we're funding something, we shouldn't be funding litigation and delay. We should be funding the actual development of infrastructure and housing.
Is, just one thought on that. I'm not familiar with 133, but I'll make myself familiar with it. But one of the suggestions, which isn't in the bill yet, but we hope will be one of the tiers of infrastructure financing, will be to make it possible to create, well, right now it's easy to create an assessment district. The problem is that in this state, unlike almost any other, when you go to issue bonds supported by the assessment, you need a townwide vote rather than simply a vote of the people who are assessed.
Yes.
And we're going to try to change that.
Yes. I'm going to look at Cameron to get into the details of how we structured CHIP and if anything changed. And actually Cameron didn't do the project-based
John.
TIF, that was John.
Yeah.
So when you have John in, you can go over the details just in case anything changed in finance, but that was our intent as well. We like this esteemed chamber will probably go around the bend on a lot of things related to tax increment financing once more. And you know, I will just say, in case it's helpful by way of introduction, I started my career on this committee in 2009. I served on House Ways and Means. I served on Senate Finance. So these are not new conversations, but they certainly could use new energy. I will certainly say that. But, you know, we will continue to be your partner in ensuring that these are flexible tools. And I said to the planner of St. Albans City this morning, you know, I want these project-based TIFs to work for everyone from Fairhaven to Burlington. You know, we've had lots of projects come forward outside of existing TIF districts that are really worthy of this kind of consideration. And we've been trying to work on this program for a long time. So we are your partner to do anything we can to bring infrastructure to our communities. Was there anything else that I really wanted to touch on? I mean, it has some bond bank infrastructure language that was important to the governor as well. This is a year for infrastructure. And when we talk about infrastructure, S133 in my mind is a companion bill because it drives at the third permitting process that stymies development, which is A&R permits. So I could have brought a PowerPoint and put a chart up here of the 4 layers of permits that you have to go through to get something developed. All have appeals, all can be litigated to almost eternity. And, you know, all are extremely costly. We are trying to dismantle unnecessary barriers one bucket at a time. So as we look at infrastructure, in my mind, we also need to look at the A&R permit process and recognize that when we can develop infrastructure, we often actually often clean up our wastewater. We, you know, make our communities more environmentally sound. That is the conversation that many communities are having, is if they can get the money to do strong wastewater, sewer, stormwater infrastructure, then they can actually they can actually reduce flood impacts, can reduce you know, decay due to the poor infrastructure that we have right now. So, you know, that I think I'm a big picture kind of person. I am not an attorney. And so, you know, that's the goal. And God help you if you stand in my way, you know, because we need housing extremely badly in this state. I wrote an article recently that I'll end with this. The one thing we're not talking about with property taxes is that when you have so few available units of housing, we saw more than anywhere else in the country a huge delta in the value of the existing homes that we have. And so when people were reappraised in their community, while they might have expected, okay, everyone was reappraised So, our taxes will somehow even out. Everybody just had a huge and historic jump in the value of their home. That put the affordability of buying a house out of the reach of most renters and Vermonters who'd like to own a home, and significantly increased everyone's property taxes in a very short period of time. So as all of us, I think, make the property tax burden and the relief of that burden our major priority this year, you have huge responsibility in this committee to help with that by creating more units of housing and growing the grand list, which is the only win-win-win for the future of our conversations about everything from healthcare to the property tax burden and how to share that more equitably.
I think that we will be your partner. This is I have to say, I think this is a wonderful committee. There are people on this committee in the trades.
Oh,
There are people on this committee who are landlords. There are people on this committee who are very familiar with mobile home parks and have taken mobile home parks from private ownership to co-op.
Yes.
So it's a committee that's filled with people who understand different aspects of this. I think your bill is a really interesting bill, and I'm very optimistic that we can do something. I think a lot of the work lies ahead, as you said, and I think the coming session could be very useful.
Yes.
I'll be really interested to look at 133. We've talked about this in your committee. I really think that the big fish, the big gains in permit reform, we have to look at the whole system and
Exactly.
change it. So we're looking forward to one thing I think we have to do is urge the Land Use Review Board committee to think big and participate in that. So that, something really happens. Just one little addition. We also share your goal of trying to make the TIF as friendly as possible. One thing we're thinking about, again, as another layer of financing, which you have the bond bank, you have assessment districts, making those easier, you have the TIF. Another option is just simple tax abatement.
Yes.
And that is the advantage of tax abatement is it's just much simpler.
Right.
So we're thinking of 4 layers of
I
financing.
love that.
And we'll see. It's a question of what we get through, but we're trying.
Right. I'm looking at Andrew because I took my fight from Senate Economic Development to Senate Finance to actually work with the administration on property tax freezes for blighted properties that are being redeveloped. And we landed with property tax freezes of 3 years for flood impacted communities.
Right.
Which, in my mind is still the place to start. But, we have a lot of low value properties on the grand list that could be very high value. And TIF has always had this but-for test that I hope we start to move away from in a way. It's almost cruel to tell someone, you have to prove that getting this investment would develop housing units or grow the grand list in a way that would not happen otherwise. You might want to have economic development in here to tell you that we can look back and see that that's certainly been the case. Communities that have TIFs in those areas, they've seen 7% grand list growth compared to 1% everywhere else. And they've used those dollars extremely wisely to create walkable, vibrant downtowns for the most part. So there are other reasons to invest than, it wouldn't happen unless we threw some crumbs at you, frankly. This is how we grow our state and our future, is to give infrastructure dollars to invest. So I was very bullish about not having the but-for test in the project-based TIF. Because I just think it's patently unfair and then causes us to look back and say we failed somehow if we couldn't prove that impossible metric.
Understood. My own experience is that, well, it's a really good example. I spent a lot of my life in California, in working in this area. And in California, there's so much development pressure. There's so many developers. It's very conceivable that a town or a developer could gain control over an area, and then gaining control over that area, they want to make it work there. And so they want to use tax increment financing.
Mhm.
When the reality is, it could go elsewhere. It could be
Right.
somewhere else without all that infrastructure burden.
Right.
And so there is an inquiry. By contrast, in this
Yes.
state, nothing is happening
Exactly,
and there's nobody doing it. It's
right,
just, we're stuck. And it's just a totally different situation.
exactly.
Yeah, I agree with you.
Yeah. And I will say, you will see language on first that you can always remind me of another thing I'm passionate about with housing. But you will see a piece in there on first generation home ownership.
In your bill?
Yes,
Which one? One
It was
27.
in as introduced.
Oh, yeah, so's was,
did it get stripped out with the
Yeah.
money? Did the language survive or? Oh, the language didn't even survive. Okay, well, the language is in
we
existence.
had the
It
same
was in.
thing.
Okay.
VHFA.
We went first
Yes.
generation and we did
Yes.
first time and first
Yes.
generation, both of them
Exactly.
stripped out.
Yes, okay. I didn't know the language got
But I
stripped out.
did,
but it is
listen, I
existing.
did
Yeah.
talk to Andy.
Yes.
I
He
mean,
knows.
it's not over.
It
is
is
it?
not over.
Okay, well, I mean, not even over this year, maybe.
Oh, no, it is not over this year.
Okay,
Um,
good.
far from over. And I'll just say, people who are newer to this housing conversation or the legislature have asked, why first time, why first generation? Mr. Chair, I don't know if you know this, but I grew up in California. My parents just moved to Vermont. They sold their home from an area that was under evacuation, very recently, obviously, with the fires of Los Angeles. I spent a chunk of my life in a motel that was one of the first icons to be burned down in the fire, the Topanga Ranch Motel. My father had our home foreclosed when he lost his business. My mother was a single mom trying to pay Los Angeles rent. And my father bounced around from motel to motel for a lot of my childhood. My sister was homeless. So, people often look at my new last name and make assumptions about why I care so much about housing policy. But if you had driven down Pacific Coast Highway and seen the Topanga Ranch Motel for the last 20 years, before being burned down, it was gated off. And it was gated off because of wealthy neighbors who didn't want to see cottage style living, people with dogs, people with kids, people who didn't fit the Topanga and Malibu aesthetic in their mind. And they had the local park district take over the property as to make open space. And then the historic preservationists got involved and said, this is a historic iconic hotel that was actually built. I don't know if it was, it might have even been a Frank Lloyd Wright, or, it was a very famous architect who had worked on the project. So after they were done fighting, those empty cottages sat for another 20 years after they had made many families homeless or housing unstable. So, if people want to know why I am really unapologetic about taking aim at things like historic preservation and environmental permitting when they are in the way of housing people who need housing the most, it is an environmental justice lens that I come with, and it is the idea that we have used a lot of these processes to weaponize these underlying important arguments about climate change and environment and preserving history to keep, quote unquote, those people out of our neighborhoods and communities. If you'd like to take a listen, I did a Vermont Public Radio piece with Leah Rothstein, the daughter of Richard Rothstein, who was the author of The Color of Law. And We kept the color of law on our shelf throughout our entire permit reform process last biennium. And frankly, maybe your chair and I can write the rural version of the color of law, but these things happened here. They happened in the north. They were just not on paper. They weren't drawn with bright red lines in Vermont. But we are dismantling a history of polite segregation. That is sort of housing has become the last bastion of very visible segregation in this country that's reinforced by our permitting and zoning laws.
Well, thank you so much for taking time to be with us, and we look forward to working together.
Same.
Any questions of the committee? Yes.
I don't even know who to put this question to, but it's a freshman question. Why are some towns opposed to districts?
Oh.
I don't know that towns are opposed to TIF districts. It's just very difficult. TIF districts, because towns are so small, in most states, there is no such thing as a central entity that does TIF. If a town wants to do a tax increment financing, they do it. That's because most towns are the size of Vermont. A small town is the size of Vermont, 600, 500,000 people. They have the staff. They can do it. They just do it. Here, it's got to go through a central agency. And it's just difficult. It's made it very bureaucratically difficult to do tax increment financing.
Right. You will see pushback that I think is fair and rightful from the committees that are responsible for the revenues of the state, because we're having a major education fund conversation. And this allows you to borrow against your future growth to reinvest in that infrastructure and into your community. The large TIFs sometimes have a hard time, proving that growth and repaying the education fund in a short period of time. It often takes them 5 to 7 years just to get their project lined up to do that project. So you see a lot of extensions in the large TIF program. You see a lot of arguments about, are they doing it the right way? Are they separating the finances out correctly? That cause people to experience mistrust with how the money's being handled and how much is being lost or gained by our grant list. I hope, and in fact, that's meant we haven't approved a lot of new large TIFs recently for that reason, is proving the value out of such a vast, complex area like downtown Burlington or most of St. Albans, where you have so many different landlords and property owners and moving pieces. I think that's what makes the project TIF something we've been trying to work out for so long, is it's very discrete. You see obvious grand list growth when Fairhaven goes from having, an abandoned racetrack to 50 units of new home ownership. And so there's not as much need to prove that there will be that value added. So I think the rightful concerns about the larger TIF program have finally engendered something that we hope will work. If it's helpful too, we went all the way around the bend and back on how prescriptive we make the language around the type of housing that needs to be built. We all agree our intent is not to create luxury high rises, with this program. And we know that the policy levers we're used to pulling do not create moderate and middle income housing generally. So if we just tie it to affordable housing, we often make the rest of the units more expensive if a portion is affordable. If we want workforce housing that pencils out, that looks different in every part of the state. So, God bless, if you want to work on the language around how we define the type of housing we're trying to create and what percentage or what proportion. But we had that conversation in multiple committees and chose to leave it in a flexible place for now, and see what happens in your chamber.
Thank you. Any other Questions yet?
I am sorry that I was not here. I was introducing a bill at corrections, but did we talk about the overlap with
Yes.
169? Okay.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, so I would love to chat. I don't want to take up more time, but if you had any other questions or feedback, I'd be happy to hear that.
I'm sure that this isn't going to be the last time we're going to be working together.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
If you're in a rush, it's fine. I just want to put out there that Senator and I share a passion for transportation, for public transit, as a key to meeting both, equity goals and environmental goals, and housing and being able to get out of poverty is,
Mhm.
transportation challenges are one of the biggest obstacles,
Mhm.
And so I just wanted to give a shout out to maybe thinking of ways of ensuring that TIFs and construction plans and development permits and, all of this, that we keep that at top of mind, that as we're seeing our public transit shrink and shrink and shrink, it feels like we're circling the drain, that we keep that in mind.
Yeah, so, and I had this conversation with the St. Albans city planner this morning on my way in. And I'm looking at Molly Dugan because a passion of mine is senior and multi-generational housing. And so when people say, oh, well, everyone has a car, et cetera, the more senior housing we develop, and the more housing for people with disabilities, another passion for our committee, the more you really truly do need real transportation solutions that work for everyone. And the more you do it for those most vulnerable, everyone benefits. We truly need transportation to be hand in hand in this conversation. I thought the direction you were going was about the immigration status piece.
Yeah.
In the bill, I'm frankly impressed that the Senate was able to keep the piece in about not using immigration status against somebody in housing decisions. There's probably more work to do to make sure that's a functional section that we did not have time
We're
for.
taking actually a lot of
Great.
testimony
Thank you.
on actually H-169. And I think we can work something out.
Yes, and I think it's frankly a matter of public safety to ensure that our immigrant populations have a safe place to lay their heads at night for their own well-being and just for the dampening effect that current actions by the federal government are having on people feeling overexposed in our communities. So that work came out of a tripartisan farm worker task force committee that met from the summer to the fall. We were looking at unionization opportunities for farm workers, but we quickly felt that states that had those unionization opportunities on their books had never seen that kind of effort, largely because of the undocumented status and the scattered nature of the workforce. But they are critical to our survival as an agricultural state. And so we went more in the direction of how do we actually meet their basic needs in terms of working conditions, wages, and housing. So perhaps that's why you saw that provision survive coming out of the Senate, because we had done some work in thinking about a critical component of our workforce and how vulnerable and unsafe, their living conditions are. But there's certainly more work to do to make that piece more than symbolic. So we really are grateful that you are going to do that work.
Well, thank you. And thank you for taking the time to be with us.
Yes, thank you so much for having me.
Thank you.
Cameron's going to do the hard work of actually telling you what we know. And it's a privilege to work with you today. It's fine.
Cameron, you are up next. And we all, just so you know, Cameron, we all now have printed copies of your latest work of art.
Perfect. It's beautiful.
By the way, just something very basic. Just to clarify, something that Keisha said that was very important in response to your question. She was talking about existing TIP law. Existing TIPs, tax increment financing, is done in the state, has been done not on a very narrow project-specific basis, but an area-wide basis. And the area is defined as, it's defined by the select board or the city council, and it does it, for a whole area that they want to redevelop. And it creates complexity to have that. In other states, it's called redevelopment. And what the whole effort right now is to try to do something that's much simpler and is basically aimed at one project so that it could be less bureaucratic, could be easier to do. The fear is that it's maybe easier to do, but it's still not easy enough to work in some of the really small areas. And that's what we're going to be working on and the Commerce is going to be working on. Cameron, welcome. Would you like to tell us who you are? And take it away.
Yes, sir. For the record, Cameron Wood, Office of Legislative Counsel. Good morning. Hope everybody's staying dry. My thought, Mr. Chair, is I can pull up S-127 as it passed and begin to walk through it. You all have the side-by-side, so that will allow me to reference to the side-by-side. But as opposed to walking through this document, I'll just walk through the bill. And
I think that makes sense.
Okay.
For the viewing audience, to the extent that we have it, the side-by-side is available on our website. Is it under Cameron for today? If you go to today's, you'll see the side-by-side and can follow along there.
Okay. And what you have in front of you should be draft 2.2. And so this is different than the side-by-side we actually looked at, I believe it was last week, because
Right.
this is the as-passed version. So this includes all of the amendments that were made both to your bill as well as S-127 that ultimately came over.
Right there.
Yeah, okay, but we only have printouts of the as introduced.
Well, yeah, the bill itself.
Oh, I see, right,
What you've got up is
as
as
passed.
passed.
This is the official as passed, and it should be the unofficial version, I believe, is up on the website. The official version was approved this morning by me, so I'm not sure if it's made its way to the.
But the unofficial version, the official version has this, I keep getting mixed up. The official version that has the strikeout?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, so the unofficial
Yeah,
version
that's what you want.
is up there, which is what we're looking at, right?
This is the official version.
Okay, all right.
So let's just do a quick check. So I can operate 3 different computers while I'm sitting here.
I think I see. Wow.
What?
S-127. No, okay. No, it's not.
It's not up yet, right?
So, okay.
So the unofficial version isn't up yet either. Okay, so this is a grand reveal that.
Yes, seeing this for the first time as the public. This official version was approved this morning. I'm assuming it will be up today. The as passed that you have in front of you, this is the official version as well. So you have it there. Okay. So, S-127. So quick background, this was introduced by Senate Economic Development, Housing General Affairs, similar to your committee bill. From there, it passed out. It went to Senate Finance, the equivalent of your Ways and Means Committee. It passed out of that. Then it went to Senate Appropriations, similar to your House Appropriations, passed there. There were a few amendments that were made on the floor, and then it was passed third reading last Friday. So, we have in section 1, the Vermont Rental Housing Improvement Program. So as I kind of mentioned briefly last time we met, the key difference here is going to be related to the 5-year grants and 5-year loans. But just walking through, We have the language that you included in your bill, which kind of shields these entities from needing to comply with license lender chapter in Title VIII. This is because they're lending out money, but they're not banks. In a lot of instances, they're, nonprofit entities. And so this was administration proposing to add this language to ensure that they're not then subsequently required to comply with all of the license lender requirements. So that is in there.
The only difference is our addition of the carrying out provisions of this
Yes.
section.
And so to the bottom of page 1, top of page 2, you can see that, they have made the same changes in the language associated with the funds, striking out the sub 1 and just incorporating it into the sub 2 there. So I'm on page 3 here, and it would be page 2 of your side by side. Here's the key difference, in what passed in page 479 versus what is in S 127. And that's this on your screen. We're looking at the subsection E, where they struck the 5-year forgivable loan program. So under the language in S 127, an individual landlord would be eligible grant for a 10-year forgivable loan. If they get the grant, they would then be required to rent the unit to an individual who's in those populations, homelessness, refugees, etc., for 5 years. And then on the 10-year program, they would be required to hold that open for market rent, HUD market rent.
Let's talk about that just for a minute. I want to clarify something. As I remember, the administration's proposal struck the term forgivable loans because they, in the 5-year program, just don't do them.
This is what the administration's proposal was.
Yeah. So they didn't have.
People chose instead of the
people-
10-year.
Well,
grant.
but it wasn't a 5-year. Isn't this language in the 5-year section?
So when you're looking at sub E, right, this
Yeah.
is program requirements applicable to grants and 5-year forgivable loans. Next sentence, for a grant or 5-year forgivable loan awarded through the program, the following requirements apply for a minimum period of 5 years. And the minimum period of 5 years is staying.
Yeah,
So if you get the grant, you're required to comply for 5 years. They're just not gonna do loans for 5 years.
It's the 5-year. So in other words, this hasn't changed in that in either one, it's the 5-year program we're talking about. The administration struck forgivable loans simply because they didn't do it. They weren't doing loans. As I remember, we left it in because we thought, well, they might at some point. And that's why we left that language in. There's no policy difference other than the possibility of a loan in the future, as I remember.
If you went with the language that's here in S 127.
Yeah.
If you're a landlord, you would only have 2 options.
Right.
You would get a grant, in which case you would have to comply for 5 years. Or you could get a loan, but your loan would be for 10 years.
Isn't the 10-year program grants or loans?
Not how I read the statute, no.
I think it's the other way around. We have 5 years forgivable loans or grants and 10 years was just forgivable loans.
That is how I read it. Because when you look at the subsection E.
Wait
this
a
is the
minute, say that
section-
again? How do you read it?
I read it.
The 5-year program is grants only and the 10-year program is loans only?
The way I read it is if you get a grant, you are required to comply with the provisions for 5 years. You fall under this 5-year section.
Right.
If you look at the sub E, it is the program requirements applicable to grants. And then the requirements, you are required to comply for 5 years. And you're required to then lease to one of these populations of individuals.
Right.
When you go to the subsection F, apologies for the scroll, these, so you're in E, now we're in F, immediate next subsection, requirements applicable to 10-year forgivable loans.
Right.
So my
Okay.
understanding is, and the administration can come in and maybe testify in reality how they're implementing it, but how I read the language, there is no 10-year grant.
Right. I think, I just want to clarify. And I think we're going to have to talk to somebody just to make sure. The loan versus grant thing is not the important part. The important part, and what has to be made clear in the language, is there's two separate programs. One is a 5-year program, one is a 10-year program. It just so happened that the 5-year program works with grants and they haven't used loans. I don't know why they haven't used loans. We're going to have to find out. The 10-year program, I thought was either grants or loans, but apparently they just do loans. And I think we've got to find that out. So I think it would confuse a reader to think of this as a loan program versus a grant program. I think it's the 5-year program versus the 10-year program that matters. But you're right, this is not, we'll just have to find out where they are on this.
You know, they may say, if you want a grant and you're willing to comply with the requirements for 10 years, why are we going to say no to you?
Right,
You know?
I think we're just gonna have to. Okay,
So, again, the big change here, the remainder of this section, you know, there's a few small editing tweaks that are slightly different that I would, you know, want to just compare and combine. But the primary piece here is that subsection E, where they're striking the 5-year forgivable loan language. Where in your bill, you were keeping that option and you require the minimum set aside. And so just kind of moving into, you know, the next page here to get to the next change is right here on page 4 of your screen, but it's on page 2 of your side-by-side there. For the grants, for the 5-year loans, if you get one, if you were to keep that language, the landlord has to lease the unit to an individual who is within one of these populations. As we've talked about in the past, it's someone who is exiting homelessness, actively working with an immigrant or refugee resettlement program, an individual who has a disability and is receiving or approved to receive Medicaid funded or home and community-based services. This sub 4 was added by the committee, an individual who is displaced due to activity related to climate change or due to a natural disaster. That is being added under the Senate bill that's not included in your House bill. It's pretty straightforward, but it's just adding that as an individual who could meet that definition and be able to be, you know, the landlord could lease the unit to an individual who falls into that definition. And then the sub 5 is the same in both. You know, giving the department the authorization to approve a master lease to an organization.
Do they later clarify how you determine your displacement is from climate change?
It is not defined in the bill, so it would be up to the department to further narrow that if they wanted to create some guardrails.
I do think as a practical matter, Joe, it would be one of those, is it 5 partner agencies like that administer this program for them, like Champlain Housing Trust. You know, they're the ones through they're the ones that make the determinations as to pair up, ultimately approving which tenants go where. So I guess they would have to do that.
Okay. So continue to go down, we have the same change under the 10-year forgivable loans that was in the House version. So this is going from, again, as opposed to if you get a 10-year loan, having the landlord be required to lease to an individual who falls within those populations, instead allowing for the landlord to lease the unit for fair market rent as established by HUD. Same language there, same change. So then around page 5 here on the bill, the official version, this would be on page 3, moving to page 4 on your side-by-side, removing all of that language in sub 2. And then finally, to the end of the VHIB program, as in the Senate version, it has the creation of the revolving fund, which is also in your bill as well. So the key piece here, as you'll see in your side-by-side there on the left, which is the House version, all of that related to the set aside, the annually, the department determining how much money to set aside, a minimum of it being 30%, the requirement that they consult with the Agency of Human Services on, what level to set that minimum amount at per year, the requirement to, work with DCF and the placement of individuals and the reporting. None of that exists in the Senate version.
What we'll have to do, I mean, we have to talk to John Gilpin about this. These are 10-year grant loan thing. It's just a technicality, but we should do it. If it turns out that no, I guess it's okay. I was gonna say G says both, but it's both programs. So, yeah, okay, that's fine.
Okay. So section 2 of the Senate as passed is the Manufactured Home Improvement and Repair Program. This is the same as section 2 in your bill. So this is going to be on pages 6 and 7 of your side-by-side. There's no change. So as you all remember, this is a program that currently exists. It's in session law. It has been funded in the past, and the administration was asking to put this into statute. So it would go right under the in the section, or I should say in the subchapter, in a section right under the Vermont Rental Housing Improvement Program, VHIP, it would go there. This provides funding to, if you recall, under the sub B, numbers 1, 2, and 3, you can get funding for manufactured housing communities to do any work that needs to be done to get lots available for infill housing. Under the sub 2, it can go to a manufactured homeowner directly to help address habitability issues in their home if that is their primary residence. And then finally, in number 3, it can go towards, laying foundations for HUD-approved slabs, site prep, tie downs, utility connections of vacant lots, etc. Okay. Section 3 is the Vermont Infrastructure Sustainability Fund. This is also section 3 in your bill. So this is the bottom of page 7 on your side-by-side. And I'm just gonna, kind of quickly walk us through, but, just as a more detailed reminder, since it's been a while since we talked about it. This creates in the bond bank, a Vermont Infrastructure Sustainability Fund, the purpose of which is to, provide capital and bonds for municipalities to develop infrastructure associated with housing. So there, the bond bank is administering the fund in coordination with Department of Housing and Community Development. So I'm under subsection here of the program parameters. So they develop the program guidelines to effectively implement the funds. They will provide low interest loans or bonds to municipalities to expand infrastructure capacity. Eligible activities include engineering, planning, design, bid specifications, construction of municipal. One thing I noticed and I want to confirm with the administration is, this is the language as I recall that came over, but in the subsection C, construction for municipal, I'm not sure if that's supposed to be water and wastewater systems.
Yeah, it should be.
But it is currently waste and wastewater
Yeah.
systems. So I just want to double confirm that.
Good catch.
Then we have transportation investments, other eligible activities. All of the activities here are similar to what you all have in your bill. And then we have the application requirements. So this is going to be on page 8 of your side-by-side. Eligible projects have to demonstrate, so here's the key thing, they have to demonstrate some sort of attachment to housing. So the project's going to create reserve capacity necessary for new housing. The project has a direct link to housing unit production, and the municipality has a commitment to own or operate the project through its useful life. Now we're moving into the application criteria. Here's where there is a difference. So in looking at the criteria, the projects are evaluated based on whether there is a direct connection to proposed or in progress housing development, whether the project's an expansion of an existing system, project readiness, estimated time needed for financing. Subsection 4 here, lines 10 and 11 on the screen, the ranking of the community on the Vermont Department of Finance and Management Vermont Community Index. that remained. You all struck that.
What I'll do, remember, I'm just reminding the committee. I'm reminding the committee that we discussed it amongst ourselves, and there was I think a substantial level of dissatisfaction with the ranking. And also, I think, I don't remember who was in the room, but somebody could have been Chad. I don't know who it was. We were getting some testimony on the issue and we just decided to strike that. What I will do is tell Allison, who I'm meeting with quite a bit now, Senator Clarkson, I'll tell her what our thinking is, and they can see what they're going to do with that.
And the last piece, that has to criteria that they'll be, looked at as the demonstration of financing for the project completion or completion of the project component. The award terms, have to include the maximum loan, bond amount, maximum term, the amortization, maximum interest rates, whether the loan is eligible for forgiveness and what percentage necessary security for the loan and additional covenants encumbering the properties, and then setting it up as a revolving fund. Okay, I'm on page 11 of the document, the official document here. On your side-by-side, the way your side-by-side is set up is I listed your sections. So the Senate version is a little bit of bouncing around. This is not, it's strikeout here. This is the official version. So this is not going to appear in your side-by-side. This is just, I'm going to pause because I'm just going to comment on what you talked about with Senator Rom Hinsdale when she did her walkthrough. This was section 4 in the Senate version that included the VHFA tax credits.
For first time and first generation.
Yes, sir. The down payment assistance in the first generation, yes, sir. The language in both the House and the Senate versions was the same. So if you go to the side-by-side of the as introduced version, which we talked about last week, you'll see that the language in this section was the same in both committees. This was removed in House appropriations. It was removed in Senate appropriations. It did not make it into the final budget from the House. So
just a comment on this for members of the committee. So we in this committee had strong feelings that this was a good program. Some of us do. I talked to the chair of Senate appropriations and explained that why it was that we had originally put it in the bill. And I also talked to people at the Housing Finance Agency, and suggested to them that if they really cared about this program, they might want to consider communicating with Senate appropriations and even considering moving some money in their appropriations around. I mean, the question is, do they care enough about this program, for example, to perhaps have a little less appropriated for one of the middle income programs and put in this program instead? I just suggested that to Maura Collins via email. I just letting the committee know. I didn't advocate, I just suggested that I didn't know that the box for housing was going to change. And that if it wasn't going to change, the only way that this program would be funded is if they assented to moving funds around. I have no idea what will happen. I just want to update you as to my activity on that issue. Yeah, and that's first generation, first time home buyer, $250,000 tax credits in each case.
I apologize for being late and that I did not hear what Senator Ron Hinsdale said. But I wondered whether the committee has discussed what happens when HUD cuts come through.
No, we have not discussed that. I have asked all of the major housing agencies to come in, and they're scheduled for next tentatively Tuesday to discuss exactly that.
Will we also hear from the nonprofits on the ground that are
We will
executing?
at some point, yes.
Thank you.
I was just gonna comment that understanding it's VHFA was in Senate Finance, excuse me, Senate Appropriations yesterday to discuss this topic.
Which topic?
No, these tax credits.
Yeah.
I believe the agenda says at 3:15, if anyone's interested in listening to their testimony.
Yesterday?
Yes, ma'am. I was not able to be there because I was elsewhere, but. Oh, okay. So this was also in the Senate bill, but as you can see, it was struck. They did add an amendment on the Senate floor to insert a section that is not in your bill. So this is going to be on page 14 of your side by side. So what this is the VHFA Rental Revolving Loan Fund. So this is a program, as you can see, it was created in 2023. And, this provides funding to develop rental housing. And what the addition here is, there is a very large subsection B that has the criteria that goes into the loans that go out, how much can be loaned out, what the criteria are that the individuals who receive the funds have to then comply with. And as you can see here in the sub 7, the agency shall use one or more legal mechanisms to ensure that a subsidized unit remains affordable to a household earning the applicable percentage of area median income for the longer of 7 years or full repayment of the loan plus 3 years. And during the affordability period, the annual increase in rent for a subsidized unit does not exceed 3%. VHFA would like to add or an amount otherwise authorized by the agency. This is language that was in the Budget Adjustment Act, but because that has not been signed, the VHFA is trying to find, shouldn't speak for them, but the discussion amongst the committee was VHFA was trying to find additional vehicles for this language to go into effect. And so senators from the 4 senators of the Economic Development Housing General Affairs Committee offered an amendment on the Senate floor to add this section in to the bill.
This is just, does everybody understand?
Middle.
We heard from, I believe it was Maura Collins and others, that they wanted this, just as one change, that a little more flexibility on the 3%. And we recommended it in the BAA, and it made it into the BAA. It is unclear whether there will be a BAA. Because it is unclear whether there will be a BAA, there has been a number of all kinds of agencies and individuals and nonprofits are scrambling to get language somewhere else. And this is one of those.
Am I correct in remembering that the point of this was for situations where you have like 20% education tax increases and it doesn't even the allowable increase? So it is.
No, I have it here, and I could spend some time finding and pulling it up if you all want, or we can find some time to do a little detailed walkthrough of this provision or this program. So this is a program, again, it was passed in 2023, and it is and I'm reading now from the subsection A of that language. So this is a revolving loan fund to provide subsidized loans for rental housing development that serve middle income households. And then there are specific criteria in here about, how much money can go, and they have to, the units have to provide that at least 25% of the units in the project are affordable to a household earning between 65 and 100% of the applicable area median income.
Yeah.
And so.
Yeah, my point is just like some years, like through the maximum amount to raise that doesn't even cover
I see what you're saying.
Yeah, he's saying
Yes.
just the.
Yes.
Yeah, I think that was my memory. Remember, we had testimony, first we had testimony from a developer who talked about developing under this program. And then Maura, I think, said, it wasn't a lot of testimony, but I
It was
think
like
she
one of the
said it could be any number of reasons where things happened where the 3% just wasn't enough.
Can you remind me what, like, are there set amounts of the loans or each individual landlord can name their loan target?
There are specific caps in how much they can give out. It's a somewhat complicated subsection, but it is. The agency shall calculate the maximum amount of a loan, which shall not exceed the lesser of 35% of the cost of the project allocable to the affordable units, or the following amounts based on area median income bands. 150,000 per unit for each unit that is affordable to a household earning 65 or 80% of area median income, 100,000 for each unit that is affordable to a household earning 81 to 150% of area median income. So it's probably not easy to digest because I'm just reading it to you, but there are some caps there, and I can share this language with you in the committee if you would like. Okay. And I'm sorry, I should also say the sub-B there, those numbers can be adjusted based on looking forward. So.
Like we're giving, the language permits changing the caps and changing the, okay.
So
And then
I'm
this is
not
then-
saying that if somebody's out there hearing it, it's like, oh, it's not capped at that anymore because this is 2 years old. It does allow for those numbers to be adjusted due to inflation. So they may be slightly higher at this point.
And so we're allowing that on the rent now as well, to allow
right.
for
The
inflation.
rent is capped at 3%. The increase in rent can't go above 3% based on this language. And as the chair mentioned a second ago, I think their testimony has been just because of, recent events, that is challenging for individuals to maintain rent caps at 3%. This language would open it up to allow VHFA to establish what that cap could be. And so, to the extent you want to hear from them further about what their proposed alteration to the 3% would be, it would not be in statute any longer.
I don't think I think that might be a good idea, but I don't think it was, just whatever to make it to market. It was very specific. I just can't remember concerns over price of utilities or things like that were operating costs, changes in operating costs that were not reflected in, if 3% wouldn't be enough, but I don't know more than that. And if the committee so desires, we can certainly ask that whoever administers this, whether it's Sean, whether it's Maura, I don't know, come in. Yeah.
Okay. So we're moving into section 5 here. This is the Housing and Residential Services Planning Committee. So for your side by side, you're gonna have to go backwards just a little bit and go to page. Now I get to start.
That's right, it's on page 9.
Page 9 and 10, yeah. So what I did, the reason I kind of joined them on your side by side that way is because there was a study committee in your bill, there's a study committee in the Senate bill, they are different.
They're
So
very
you have
different,
them.
yeah.
Right, so this one is a state housing and residential services planning committee that is designed here in sub A to generate a state plan to develop housing for individuals with developmental disability.
I just want to say for everybody, this is new.
Yes.
We did not put this in our bill. And there isn't that much we're gonna have to take testimony on, but this is one thing we would have to take testimony. I'm not saying what I think is personally an interesting idea, but that doesn't matter. We have to take testimony.
So you're going into the membership. So this would include one member of a House, one member of a Senate, and then going through the members here. I haven't done the full comparison before this morning. I just did it one time. My apologies for that. There are some individuals who are on both. So for example, the Commissioner of the Department of Housing, I believe, is on both. But there are a lot of individuals that are in this committee that are not on the Universal Design Study Committee.
And vice versa.
And yes, ma'am, and vice versa. Yes.
Yeah, our committee, our Universal Design Committee is not in their bill. This is an area where it's, like I said, it's like this. So when I presented to their committee, I gave them background and the reason why, it's not transparently obvious from the face of the statute, proposed statute, why we put it in there. And I did give them some background, and I think they were generally positive.
And so what this one would do is, just to reiterate, it creates an actionable plan to develop housing for individuals with developmental disabilities. So this is in section C, that reflects the diversity of needs expressed by those individuals and their families, including individuals with high support needs who require 24-hour care and those with specific communication needs. The plan shall include a schedule for the creation of at least 600 additional units of service-supported housing, the number and description of the support needs of individuals with developmental disabilities anticipated to be served annually, anticipated funding needs, and recommendations for changes in state law or policy that are obstacles to the development of housing needed by individuals with Medicaid-funded home and community-based services.
So this is very different than the study
Totally
that you're
different.
proposing, because
Totally
you're,
different.
you're talking about making all housing at least.
It's universal, trying to figure out what
Universally,
Yeah.
universal, yeah,
Yeah, whereas this is housing specifically for
fund
folks with
population.
disability,
Right.
as opposed to like
Yeah,
a
the
big
fact-
house, or like a
right.
house that one
Yeah.
could become somebody who lives in a house and then becomes disabled, et
Yeah.
cetera, et cetera. So,
They're,
so.
the fact that they happen to be side by side, they're just two completely different efforts.
Okay.
I just put them side by side
Oh,
because
oh,
they're
you-
two committees.
They're two
So-
committee,
so
yeah,
you
calls for.
compare what your committee was versus what their committee is.
Go ahead.
Can I piggyback off of this question?
Absolutely.
And this is not a question saying like, this is what I want to do. Would it make sense to combine the two, especially if there's a few individual, just like for efficiency? But I also know how these studies can work sometimes and there's not enough time. Is that a possibility?
I don't think so.
I am-
Because I think, I see the Universal Design Committee as needing very few meetings.
Okay.
Because there's nothing really terribly controversial about it. It's just picking from a list that already exists. It's not creating something new. It's just,
Okay, perfect,
It's designed to
Very
get a
defined.
consensus around one particular issue.
yeah,
perfect.
right.
Okay,
And sorry, and so we do give them, I just want to make sure that the language that is in our two bills gives leeway so that the people that might be committed to both can kind of get yours in and then, maybe hopefully inform some of what they've learned there into, or
Yeah.
vice versa.
I mean,
How would you picture it happening?
there are some areas of conceptual overlap, but they are still so completely different. I mean, they both have to do with housing and they both have to do with people with disabilities, but they're, I think in a way, one could inform the other, but actually those parties are informing both committees versus the other way around.
it won't be the same people probably. In other words.
I think there's like one or two.
Yeah, but the agencies are all gonna designate people.
Yeah,
Just wanna make sure that our language doesn't trip them up,
Yeah.
Make sure that they're.
Let's keep going and then we'll take a break pretty soon. Okay.
I'm gonna pause here just for the D here. So it does say that for purposes of scheduling the meetings and preparing the legislation, the committee shall have the assistance of our office.
You want to
I
change
need to ask that this be removed. This can really focus on developing a state plan. It's really an administrative function. There are two legislators and that is it. So it's it would be somewhat inappropriate for our office to staff a committee of this nature.
Well, so they have to figure out, or well,
You all
here
would
we are, so it's gonna be us, right?
Yes.
Okay.
Okay, they have a report due on November 15th. And that's going to your committee as well as Human Services, and on the Senate side, similarly, Economic Development, House and General Affairs, and Health and Welfare. Secretary of Human Services calls the first meeting to occur before July 15th. They select a chair. Committee ceases to exist. There was a section here, so this is on page 17 of the bill, the official version. There was a per diems for the legislative members. And that was removed by their appropriations committee.
Is that removed because it's assumed anyway, it's in some sort of slush fund we've got to pay for that?
I believe that if legislators are going to receive per diems, you have to specifically call that out. So if it is silent, then they're not eligible. Okay. Now,
Would you, I guess could you just double check that?
yes,
The only reason I ask is I just remember when I was on the appropriations committee. Okay, I wonder about it, so if you could just double check.
Mr. Chair, we are going to move into the housing and public accommodations section. So this may be a good place if you want to take a quick break, just because the next few sections are going to be associated with
Can we
that.
take a 5-minute break right now? Okay.